Laura stood by the window, watching the golden evening light spill across her quiet suburban street. The air felt still, almost heavy, as if waiting for something. It had been years since Ethan, her stepson, had last come home. When he left for college, he was still a boy, in many ways kind, polite, but unsure of who he was. Laura had always seen something gentle in him, a softness that the world wasn't always kind to. Now, after months of silence, he had called her out of the blue, his voice quiet and uncertain. "Laura," he had said over the phone, "I think I need to come home for a while." She didn't ask questions. She simply said yes. That afternoon, when the old silver car pulled into the driveway, Laura's heart gave a small, nervous flutter. She opened the door just as Ethan stepped out, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked different, older, taller, but with the same shy eyes she remembered. "Hey, Laura," he said, trying to smile. His voice carried a hint of tiredness. Like someone who hadn't slept properly in days? Laura smiled warmly, masking the emotion that rushed up her chest. "Hey, stranger. Welcome home." He hesitated for a second, then stepped forward. The moment he entered, Laura could feel how empty the house had been without him. Her husband, Markathon's father, had been away for months on a work project, leaving Laura alone with her thoughts most evenings. Now, with Ethan home, the quiet house suddenly felt alive again. They sat at the dining table that night. It's a simple dinner, between them pasta, salad, and a candle flickering softly. Ethan picked at his food more than he ate it. Laura watched him, not with judgment, but with concern. "You okay?" she asked gently. He nodded at first, then sighed. "I don't know, Laura. I thought college would give me answers, but I just feel lost. Everyone around me seems to know what they want. Careers, plans, relationships. And I'm just standing still." Laura listened, letting him speak. There was pain in his voice, not dramatic or loud, but the quiet kind that builds up slowly inside someone who tries too hard to be strong. "It's okay to not have it all figured out," she said softly. "Life doesn't come with a map. You just have to walk through it, one step at a time." He looked up at her then, eyes tired but full of something she hadn't seen before. "Trust. You always make things sound so simple," he said with a faint smile. "That's because I've already walked through a few storms," she said, returning his smile. "You learn that not everything needs fixing. Sometimes it just needs understanding." Ethan nodded, as if holding on to her words. He looked around the house, noticing how little had changed. The same photos on the wall, the same scent of vanilla, and old books. "I missed this place," he said quietly. "It feels safe here." Laura's heart softened. That's what home is supposed to feel like. After dinner, they sat in the living room, a gentle silence between them. The fireplace crackled faintly, and Ethan leaned back, his eyes half closed. Laura studied his face, the boyish features fading into those of a young man. There was something vulnerable about him. It's a kind of vulnerability that comes when someone is trying to find himself. He broke the silence first. "You know, I used to think you were too calm. Nothing ever bothered you." Laura laughed softly. "Oh, I've had my share of storms. I just learned to stop fighting the rain." Ethan smiled. "I wish I could be like that." "You will be," she said simply. "It just takes time." There was a moment where neither spoke. The air between them was quiet, but it carried a strange comfort. Ethan finally said, "Thanks for letting me come back. I didn't know who else to call. You'll always have a place here." "Ethan," Laura said gently, "no matter what happens." He nodded and looked into the fire, his expression softening. "You're the only one who ever really listened to me." Laura felt her chest tighten at that. She wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. Instead, she just smiled, hoping he could feel her care without needing to hear it. Later that night, when he went upstairs to unpack, Laura stayed by the fire. The quiet felt different now, no longer lonely, but alive. She thought about the years that had passed since Ethan's mother had left, the way Mark had thrown himself into work to cope, and how Laura had stepped into a family that still carried pieces of another story. Ethan had always been kind to her, even when he was unsure of how to act around her. Their bond had grown slowly, built on shared dinners, late-night talks, and the simple trust that comes from consistency. She had never seen him as just a stepson. He was someone she deeply cared about, someone she wanted to see happy. But tonight, something felt different. Not in a wrong way, but in a way that made her heart ache. He wasn't the quiet teenager who once asked her for help with homework. He was a young man now uncertain, yes, but searching for something deeper. Laura brushed the thought away, telling herself it was just emotion, just nostalgia. But when she went upstairs later and paused by his door, hearing the faint sound of music playing, she couldn't help but smile. He was home. He was safe. That was all that mattered. In her own room, she sat by the window, looking at the soft glow of the streetlights outside. She wondered what had really brought Ethan home. Was it exhaustion? Confusion? Or maybe a quiet need for connection, a kind that words often fail to explain. She didn't know. Bah, she was ready to be there. However, he needed her. She had always believed that experience wasn't just about age or wisdom, it was about being willing to understand. And Ethan, she could tell, had reached that point in life where he needed understanding more than advice. Downstairs, the fire slowly dimmed and the house returned to its calm silence. But something inside Laura felt awake again. Maybe it was the feeling of purpose returning, of being needed, of caring for someone in a way that filled the emptiness. She hadn't realized she'd been carrying Dot as she closed her eyes that night. Laura whispered to herself, he just needs a little guidance. That's all. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. It was the start of something tender and transformative. Something that would challenge both their hearts in ways neither of them could yet name. And while the world outside slept, inside that quiet house, two souls one searching. One steady had begun a new chapter without even realizing it. The first few days after Ethan returned were quiet but warm. The air in the house felt lighter now, filled with the sound of soft footsteps. Morning coffee brewing, and the faint hum of life that had been missing for too long. Laura noticed small things, how he always offered to help with breakfast, how he stayed longer in the kitchen than necessary, how his eyes seemed to search for something unspoken. One evening, after a long day, Laura sat in the living room with a book in her lap, though she wasn't really reading. Outside, the rain came down softly, tapping against the windows. Ethan entered quietly, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You always liked tea when it rained," he said, handing her one. She smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness. "You remember that?" He nodded. "Some things just stay with you." He sat across from her, the firelight flickering between them. There was a calm silence that didn't need to be filled with words. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "I used to think I had to figure life out alone. But lately I feel like I can't." Laura looked at him, her voice gentle. "No one has to do it alone, Ethan. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you need someone." He nodded slowly, staring into his mug. "At college, I tried to fit in. I tried to be what everyone expected, a confident guy who knew what he wanted. But I wasn't. I was lost. I didn't even know who I was." Laura leaned forward. "It's okay to feel that way. You're growing. That confusion, it's part of finding yourself." He smiled weakly. "You make it sound simple." She smiled back. "It's not simple, but you'll get there." The fire crackled between them, and for a moment the world outside seemed far away. The house felt like its own little universe, quiet, warm, safe. Ethan looked up suddenly and said, "I've missed this. Talking like this. You always listen. Really listen." Laura felt a pang in her chest, a mix of pride and tenderness. "That's what family is for," she said softly. He hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever feel invisible? Like people see you, but they don't really see you?" Laura took a slow breath. "All the time. I think everyone feels that way at some point." Ethan looked at her closely, as if trying to read her thoughts. "You don't seem like someone who ever feels invisible," she chuckled quietly. "That's because you've never seen me when I'm alone." He didn't say anything, but the way his eyes softened said enough. He understood. Maybe for the first time he saw her not just as his stepmother, but as a person, someone with her own quiet battles and dreams. As the night deepened, their conversation drifted into Story's childhood memories, old regrets, and small hopes. They laughed, sometimes fell silent, and sometimes shared things they had never said out loud before. It wasn't the kind of closeness that came from family alone. It was the kind that grows between two souls who genuinely understand each other at one point. Ethan leaned back and said, "I used to think you were just patient because you had to be. But now I think you're patient because you care." Laura smiled softly. "You notice a lot more now." "Maybe I'm just learning to see people properly," he said. His words lingered in her mind long after they stopped talking. There was something in his tone, sincere, searching, that stirred something inside her. She reminded herself that he was still finding his way, that she needed to guide, not blur the lines. Still, she couldn't deny the strange warmth in her chest when he looked at her that way. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the glass. Ethan stood and moved to the window, watching the dark street beyond. "It's strange," he said quietly. "Coming home feels different now, like I'm seeing everything with new eyes." Laura joined him by the window, standing beside him. "That's what growing up does. It changes how you see the same things." He turned his head slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You make it sound peaceful." "It can be," she said, "if you let yourself slow down long enough to notice the good things." He nodded, his eyes distant but calm. For a moment, the two of them just stood there, side by side, watching the rain. It was one of those moments that said more than words ever could, quiet, full of emotion, and oddly comforting. After a while, Ethan broke the silence. "You know, I never told Dad how hard things got. He's always been busy, and I didn't want to disappoint him." Laura looked at him, her voice full of understanding. "You wouldn't have disappointed him, Ethan, but I know what you mean. Sometimes it's easier to open up to someone who just listens, not someone who tries to fix everything." He smiled faintly. "Like you." Laura didn't answer, but she smiled back. Her eyes glistened with quiet affection, and in that moment she realized something. Ethan didn't just need guidance. He needed to feel believed in. He needed someone to remind him he mattered. The clock ticked softly. The rain began to ease, and Ethan finally stood. "It's getting late. I should let you rest." Laura nodded, even though she didn't want the night to end. "Good night, Ethan." He paused at the doorway and looked back, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you. For tonight? I don't remember the last time I felt this." "Understood." She smiled gently. "Good night," she repeated, her voice warm. When he was gone, the house felt still again. But the silence was different, softer, meaningful. Laura sat back down, staring at the fire as it slowly burned out. She couldn't stop thinking about how much Ethan had changed. The boy who used to hide behind awkward smiles now spoke with honesty and depth. He wasn't lost because he was weak. He was lost because he was growing. And as she thought about their conversation, she realized something else she had missed being needed. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, human way. She had spent so long trying to be strong for everyone that she'd forgotten how comforting it felt to connect deeply with someone who saw her heart clearly. Later, as she climbed into bed, Laura whispered to herself, "He's learning to find himself. That's what matters." Yet deep inside, she knew their bond had deepened in a way that words couldn't easily define. It wasn't about romance or family. It was about connection. Two souls meeting in a quiet space between understanding and care. That night, as the rain faded into the sound of the wind, Laura felt peace for the first time in a long while. Ethan was home, healing, growing, and in helping him. She felt herself healing too. Little did she know, the next part of their journey would test that peace, revealing feelings neither of them had expected. But both needed to understand before they could move forward. The days after that rainy night were quieter. Something had changed between Laura and Ethan, nothing said out loud, but both of them felt it. Their conversations had become careful, their glances shorter, their words softer. Laura knew Ethan was still processing what they'd talked about, and she didn't want to push him. She also needed time to understand her own thoughts. There was warmth between them, but also uncertainty. Ethan started spending more time outside. He mowed the lawn, fixed the old fence, and repaired things that had been broken for months. Laura watched from the kitchen window, feeling both proud and uneasy. He looked focused, determined, yet she could see that quiet struggle in his eyes, the same one she'd seen at dinner when he first came home. One afternoon, Laura stepped outside with 2 glasses of lemonade. The sun was bright, the air heavy with the smell of fresh grass. Ethan looked up from where he was painting an old wooden chair and smiled slightly. "You didn't have to bring that," he said. "I wanted to," she replied, handing him a glass. "You've been working hard." He wiped his hands on a rag and took the drink. "It keeps me busy. Helps me think." Laura sat on the steps nearby. "About that night?" she asked carefully. He nodded after a pause. "Yeah, I didn't mean to make things strange. I just spoke without thinking. I don't have much experience with, well, feelings like that." Laura nodded, her tone calm. "It's okay, Ethan. Life gets confusing sometimes, especially when you're trying to figure yourself out." He sighed, setting his glass down. "I think I've spent so long trying to be what everyone expected that I never learned how to just be honest. That night I was honest for once. Maybe too much." She smiled softly. "Honesty is never too much. It just takes courage to face what it shows." Ethan looked at her, his eyes steady. "Then I guess I'm still learning." Their eyes met for a second, long enough for both of them to feel that quiet connection. Again, but Laura quickly looked away. She didn't want him to mistake care for something else. She respected him too much for that. Trying to change the subject, she said, "That chair looks new already. You're good at this?" He smiled faintly. "Guess I needed to fix something that actually stayed fixed." Laura's heart tightened at the words. She knew what he meant. So many of life's problems couldn't be solved with a hammer and paint. Sometimes people themselves needed time to heal. The next few days followed a slow rhythm. They shared meals, exchanged small talk, but both avoided deep topics. Laura noticed how Ethan often stayed outside at night, sitting on the porch, staring at the stars. One evening she joined him, bringing a blanket. "It's getting cold," she said, wrapping it around them both. He smiled softly. "Thanks." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind. Finally, Ethan said, "Do you ever wonder how people figure out who they're supposed to be?" Laura looked at the stars. "All the time. But I've learned that we don't find ourselves in a single moment. We find pieces of ourselves through the people who care about us." He turned his head slightly toward her. "Like you." She hesitated but nodded. "I think we've both helped each other in ways we didn't expect." Ethan smiled faintly, but his expression carried something deeper. "You've done more for me than you realize." Laura didn't reply, afraid her voice might shake. She knew he wasn't just talking about advice or guidance. He was talking about the quiet understanding between them, the bond that had grown slowly and naturally. The next morning, Laura woke early to make breakfast. She found a note on the counter in Ethan's handwriting. "Went for a drive. Need to clear my head. Don't worry." She felt a small ache in her chest. She told herself he needed space, that giving him time was the best way to help. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that filled the house without him. By evening, he returned. He walked in quietly, a little dusty, his face tired but calm. Laura met him at the door. "Long drive." He nodded. "Yeah, I needed to think." "Did it help?" she asked. He gave a small smile. "I think so." "I realized something." Laura tilted her head. "What's that?" He looked at her carefully, his voice steady but gentle. "I keep waiting for someone to tell me who I should be, but maybe I've been looking in the wrong places. Maybe I just needed to believe in myself." Laura smiled with quiet pride. "That's a good start." Ethan took a slow breath. "And I realized something else. I was looking for comfort because I didn't know how to face my own doubts. You didn't make things confusing. I did. but your kindness helped me see myself more clearly." Her eyes softened. "That's what I wanted for you, Ethan. You just needed to see what's already there." For a long moment, neither spoke. There was peace in the air, a sense of clarity. The tension that had built up between them began to fade, replaced by something pure mutual respect and quiet understanding. That evening, they sat on the porch again. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. Ethan leaned back, breathing deeply. I think this place feels like home again," he said. Laura smiled. "That's because you've changed the way you see it." He nodded. Maybe I've finally changed the way I see myself." She looked at him, proud and calm. "That's what growing up is," smiled faintly. "Thank you, Laura, for not giving up on me." "You were never someone to give up on," she said warmly. There was silence again, but it wasn't awkward, it was peaceful. The kind of silence that happens when two people understand each other completely. That night, Laura stood at the window, watching Ethan in the yard as he put away the tools he'd been using. He moved differently, now more sure of himself, more confident. She realized he wasn't the same boy who had come home lost and uncertain. He had found his strength, and in helping him find it, Laura felt something inside her change too. She had rediscovered the quiet joy of caring for someone, of watching them grow. She didn't need anything more than that. The connection they shared had done what it needed to do, had healed them both in quiet, unseen ways. As Ethan came back inside, he smiled and said, "I think I'm finally ready to go back to school next week." Laura's heart swelled with emotion. "I'm proud of you, Ethan." "Only because you helped me believe I could do it," he said sincerely. She smiled. "No, you did that yourself. I just reminded you who you were." He laughed softly and nodded. "Maybe you're right." When he went upstairs that night, Laura stayed in the kitchen, turning off the lights one by one. The house was quiet again, but this time it didn't feel lonely. It felt full of growth, of memories, of something beautiful that had bloomed without ever needing to be named. Laura whispered to herself, "He'll be fine now." And for the first time in a long while, she truly believed it. The morning sun came through the kitchen window, spreading soft light across the table where Laura sat, holding a cup of coffee. It was quiet, but a comforting kind of quiet, the kind that follows a storm once everything has settled. Ethan had changed. She could see it in the way he carried himself, in how he spoke, and even in how he smiled. The boy who had once walked into her home with uncertainty now stood taller, calmer, and more sure of who he was. He came downstairs that morning with a folded piece of paper in his hand. "Morning," he said, his voice light. "Good morning," she replied, smiling. "You're up early." He sat down, placing the paper on the table. "Yeah, I couldn't sleep much. I've been thinking." Laura raised an eyebrow. "About what?" He pushed the paper toward her. "About leaving again. I think I'm ready to go back." She looked at him quietly, her heart tightening a little. "Already?" He nodded. "Yeah, I think I just needed this break. Needed to find some peace before trying again." Laura smiled, though her chest felt heavy. "Then that means you found what you came looking for." "I think I did," he said softly. "You helped me remember that I wasn't broken. I just needed someone to believe in me until I learned to believe in myself." His words touched her deeply. She reached across the table, squeezing his hand gently. "That's all you ever needed, Ethan. You always had it in you." He looked at her hand for a moment, then back at her. When I first came home, I thought I was a failure. But now I see I just needed to stop running. You gave me a space to breathe, and that changed everything." Laura smiled warmly. Sometimes love isn't about fixing someone. It's about giving them room to find themselves. He nodded slowly. "You've been like a light in a dark time, Laura. I'll never forget that." Her throat tightened, but she held her composure. "You don't have to. Just carry it with you, the way you carry everything that's made you who you are." They sat in silence for a moment, both lost in thought. Then Ethan said quietly, "I left you something." Laura blinked. "What do you mean?" He pointed to the folded paper she still hadn't opened. She unfolded it carefully. Inside, written in his neat handwriting, was a simple note. "Thank you for helping me grow. For being patient. For seeing the good in me when I couldn't. You've shown me what real love and care look like, not the kind that fades, but the kind that stays forever in the heart." By the time she finished reading, her eyes were wet. "Ethan," she began softly, but he smiled before she could continue. "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know." That evening, they had dinner together, just the two of them, as always. The house was quiet except for the sound of soft music playing from the old radio. It was a simple meal, but it felt special. They didn't talk much, but there was peace in the silence. After dinner, Ethan stood by the doorway with his bag packed. "I should head out early tomorrow," he said. "I've got a long drive ahead." Laura nodded. "You'll do great, Ethan. You're ready now." He smiled, a mix of gratitude and sadness in his eyes. "It's strange," he said softly. "I came back here because I felt lost. Now leaving feels just as hard." "That's because home isn't just a place," she said gently. "It's the people who remind you who you are." Ethan looked at her, emotion flickering in his eyes. "You did that for me. You gave me a home again." Laura stepped closer and hugged him. It wasn't a long hug, but it carried everything words couldn't say: care, understanding, and quiet love. "Take care of yourself," she whispered. "I will," he said softly. "You've already taught me how." The next morning, Laura woke to find the house empty. His car was gone, but the air still held traces of him, the coffee mug on the counter, the jacket he'd forgotten on the chair. She smiled faintly and folded the jacket neatly, placing it by the door. The days that followed felt calm. She missed having someone around, but it wasn't the same ache as before. It was the peaceful kind of missing, the kind that comes when you know someone is out there doing well. Ethan called every few days, sharing stories about school and his plans. He sounded happy, confident. One afternoon, she received a message from him. "Got an internship offer today. Couldn't have done it without your advice. Thank you again for everything." Laura smiled, reading it over and over. She typed back, "You did it on your own, Ethan. I just reminded you of your strength." As she sent the message, she realized how much both of them had changed. She wasn't just someone who had given advice. She had found a purpose again. Helping him had reminded her of her own strength, to the ability to care deeply, to guide without holding on too tight, and to love in the purest, most human way. Weeks turned into months, and life went on. The seasons changed, and the house grew quiet again, but it was no longer an empty quiet. It was peaceful, full of memories that made her smile. One evening, she sat on the porch, watching the sunset. The same old chair Ethan had painted months ago sat beside her. She reached out, tracing her fingers along its smooth surface. It was a reminder of how far they had both come. She thought about how strange life could be, how people cross paths, teach each other, and leave pieces of themselves behind. Ethan had come home searching for direction, and in helping him, Laura had found something. Too, a sense of meaning she hadn't felt in years. As the sun disappeared behind the trees, her phone buzzed. It was Ethan again. A picture this time, him standing on a small apartment balcony, smiling, holding a cup of coffee. The caption read, "Feels like home again." Laura smiled, her heart warm. She typed back, "Proud of you, always." Then she put her phone down and looked at the sky, glowing softly with the colors of dusk. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real. And in that realness, there was beauty. Ethan had found his way. And Laura, in her quiet strength, had rediscovered what truly mattered. Not perfection, but connection. The kind that heals, lifts, and endures. That night, she sat by the fireplace, sipping tea. The house hummed gently, the flames flickering like small memories. She thought of the words Ethan had written about real love being the kind that stays in the heart, and she finally understood. Love didn't always mean staying close. Sometimes it meant letting someone go, knowing they would carry a piece of you wherever they went, as the fire burned low. Laura whispered softly into the quiet room, "You did it." Ethan, and though no one was there to hear it, the warmth in her chest told her that somewhere, somehow, he felt it too.